Dumalang Sambanani, hello South Africa. A very warm welcome to Expressions. This is definitely the place for you to air your views. I'm your host, Jacqueline Mapala.
And I'm your host, Mkolisi Wamasango. As you can see, we're still keeping safe. Jackie's still wearing our masks, and of course we've just sanitized, but we still continue to have very important conversations, Konelago Expressions. Now, as the debate about public versus private schools continues to rage on, your number one youth current affairs show explores both these sectors, namhlanje, as we're also going to be giving you some accounts from young people from both sides of the public as well as the private sector of schools, which Jacqueline, we've been very hard at work. Let's just quickly have a look at this first insert. Now, the South African education system is made up of public, which is also known as government, private, which is also known as independent schools. And of course, just deciding where your child falls can set them up for life. So, Ganjaloge, we're also asking a very important question as to what constitutes inequality in the schooling system.
In every action that we do as a country, must always act in the best interest of the child. Looking at ECD centers, we have private ECD centers and public ECD centers, and that's where separation starts, and it starts from an early age. But then we should start prioritizing the equality of education so that we get the same education. It is the government's responsibility, as the UNCRC, which recommended that the South Africa should prioritize education.
In both schools, Section 9 of the South African Constitution 1996 not promoted, which is the right to equality. So because during hard lockdown, children from the private schools were learning online, and their schools actually have websites that they can use to learn. And meanwhile, children in public schools don't have access to those things.
It is really unfair that public schools have to open first, and what about us? Because we're learning the same thing, we are the same age, same grade, but why do we have to start late?
The government also forget about rural area schools because of they must go back to school, but the infrastructure is still broken. So it's raining, it's summer, it's raining, and it's going to be winter soon, and they must go back to school. Some of them don't have roofs in their classes, and this is going to lead to more dropouts than last year because of it's going to be tough for them.
The debate between private and public schools continues to rage on, and of course it's a very hot potato here in the country. Speak to us about some of the roles that you've played, because I know that you were a part of the activists that took out some kids from school. Speak to us about that, and why did it happen?
Well, last week we shut down one of the independent schools on the basis that they were operating against the mandate of government. And we were of the view that if they are ready to open, they must submit themselves to government, and government must determine whether they are ready to open or not. We cannot have a situation where we have schools that are a law into themselves. Everything must be government be regulated by government. We are facing a deadly virus, and these private schools continue to milk parents, continue to make profit against the mandate of government. So we were shutting down those schools because we believed that government has said schools must close until a particular period where government says they must open. They might argue and say they are ready. But when government has not said that they are ready, we believe they are not ready. If they are ready, they must convince government that they are ready, and government must allow them to open.
So Ushuguti, in essence, this is all in a way also promoting inequality.
It cannot be that you have two educational systems in one country. We are of the view that government must nationalize private schools, and we must all have one system. For creating a country that is non-racial, non-sexist, equal and prosperous, if we are all going to participate in the same economy, in the same society, we must all be prepared the same. Well, how come that you have others prepared the particular way and others prepared the particular? Because education, in essence, is a preparation for a person to participate in the economy and in society. So if we want to create one South Africa and one future, we must have one educational system, because an education is a process where people are socialized into cultures, beliefs, and in a way of life which society functions.
Yeah, then Mr. Kulu, then you have some of those parents within the private sector who come and say, don't make our problems your problems. We decided to take our kids to the private schools. Now you're making your issues our issue. What would your response to that?
One, we believe that we must look into issues as society, not as individuals. The problems that we have them as a country, not as individuals. So you have a problem when you have individual success in a society where majority people are in poverty.
So how do we bridge the gap then? How do we say, okay, let's get to a point where we're all on the same level from the private sector and the public school sector to say our main goal is to ensure that ingane are educated?
Well, firstly, before we get that, we must agree that we need to do it. Why we also need to do it is because these schools, majority of them were not built by private companies or by themselves, were built with state money during apartheid. So what then happened when we transitioned to the new society or to the new South Africa, white people got to keep their schools and they turned them into private companies. And we got to inherit public schools. So we need to bring them together so that we also deal with the backlog in public schools. We need to share the infrastructure first. Secondly, we need to do it because we also inherited an apartheid debt as black people who are in government. So it then says that there was no social and historic justice because that international debt were made to pay by the apartheid and by the international institutions. But when it comes to school, of which we regard as assets, we're not allowed to inherit them. So as a matter of historic social justice, we must be allowed to nationalize these schools. What type of integration in society are you building if you are going to put tech and price tag to education? We also believe that these schools allow what you call commodification of education, where education is accessed on the basis of affordability, then on the basis of few qualifying for it.
We continue with this all-important conversation around the inequalities between public and private schools. You are watching Expressions. We'll be back right after this.
Do you think the challenges that are faced by both kids in the public as well as the private sector are the same?
No, I actually don't think that's the same because they are ahead with their curriculum and they have already gotten a jump start on how to actually go about with the school year. And with us, we have to start all over again.
Learners from private schools, they do have an advantage, but then we also need to acknowledge, I come from a public school, but then we also need to acknowledge the fact that it's not their fault that they come from advantaged backgrounds, but then the government should start prioritizing the right to education, because if we attend different schools but then the education, the kind of education we're getting is not the same, then to me it seems as if that people from disadvantaged backgrounds are sort of programmed for failure in life.
It is like we've been portrayed to actually not be employers but to be employees, which is something that is a tactic. We're not taught skills but theory most of the time, and that is something that we are lacking in South Africa as the economy. We do not have that jump start, and as kids, if we are taught skills at a younger age, we are given an advantage to actually utilize them in specific places so that we can actually enhance our backgrounds and actually change the situation from home.
Now, welcome back. You're still watching Expressions, and this is your #1 youth current affairs show. As the debate between public and the private sector of education continues to rage on, Kanalagwe Expressions, we bring you, of course, insights from all different spheres. Please interact with us. Joining us on the line via Skype is now Ulebohang Mojane, who is the Executive Director of the Independent Schools Association of Southern Africa. Thank you so much for your time, Lebo. Welcome to Expressions. Speak to us about how the Independent Schools Association of Southern Africa works. Do you guys work in silos, or do you work hand in hand with the Department of Education?
We work hand in hand with the Department of Education under the framework of the South African Constitution and the South African Schools Act.
What is your mandate?
Our mandate is that we advocate for our members and we provide them with services. So we work closely with the Department of Basic Education and engage with them. And now, certainly during periods of COVID, we share with our members what the requirements are, and then we also give inputs to policy and regulatory changes.
All right. So who funds the Independent Schools Association of Southern Africa?
Our association is actually funded by our members through subscriptions. However, in terms of independent schools, the vast majority of them are actually funded by parents through school fees. What we do have, though, in South Africa are a number of schools that are subsidized schools, and those receive a state subsidy.
Okay, so now, Lebu, as expressions, we're having a conversation, about the public school versus private school debate. And we've had some young people come onto the platform and also say, you know what, they in the public sector feel like they're also disadvantaged because there was that thing about having private schools open before public schools. How would you respond to that?
Independent schools and public schools all have to have a minimum number of school days. Independent schools comply with the guidelines and the regulations in terms of the minimum number of school days. However, what is different is this: independent schools generally open sooner than public schools and close sooner than public schools. So the debate that, some people are at school, some people are not at school, is actually not a helpful debate. The other issue that people must understand is South Africa, the vast majority of our children are in public schools, unlike most of our counterparts on the African continent, or even, for example, in India, where 50% of students are in independent schools. So our government is actually educating the vast majority of children. So our sector is tiny. It is less than 4% of all children going to school. So obviously, that is going to be a different response under the COVID conditions than a whole system that has millions, like 15, 13 million children in a system. So I really do think that the obsession with independent schools is really quite concerning.
So let's speak about solutions now. As much as we can have this hoo-ha around public versus private schools and how some people also feel, you guys are at an advantage, how would we bridge the gap to ensure that we all sing from the same hymn book? Because the main concern is to ensure that the children are educated.
The gap in South African education is between fee-paying schools and non-fee paying schools. So there are public schools in our country that charge fees that are higher than some of my members. Some of my members have no fee schools. So when we talk about the inequalities and the divisions in society, that is also reflected in the independent schooling sector and the public schooling sector. So really the division is between fee-paying schools and non-fee paying schools. And the fee-paying schools and public schools produce similar results to independent schools. And also, there are good no-fee paying schools in our country. I really feel bad for our country because we obsess about, everything is bad. South Africa has more children in schools. It achieved the Millennium Development Goals of 100% of children being in schools. And the Millennium Development Goals would not have set that standard had everybody in the world actually achieved it. So really what I would love to hear from South Africans, let us talk about our challenges. However, let us also recognize our achievements.
Well, Mundomusha, what do you have to say about the conversation we're having? Siyabuza again namhlanje, is COVID-19 exposing more of the inequalities in basic education? What do you have to say? There's more in this conversation. Masbuya, stay with us. What solutions do you think government should be bringing in to ensure ukuthi ingane zethu are first of all equal in terms of the hierarchy yey'kole?
Well, the government should actually make the education free for all and make sure that everyone gets the same equal quality education. In as much as you're paying school fees, can I also get the same quality of education as much as I'm not paying school fees in a public school? Can I have utilities, assets that are important for me to use at school to be sufficient enough? I do not need to be lacking on certain things, then that means I cannot study harder.
South Africa should prioritize the right to education, which is Section 9 in the Constitution of Republic of South Africa, and also that they should adhere and try to look at the concluding observations made by the UNCRC that indeed South Africa has a gap when it comes to education, and we should start there and fixing that gap, because even now, if you look at this situation right now at hand, LECO has been opened. Other learners are excited about that LECO has been opened, like it's going to lead to dropouts of learners. What about those who are already in private schools? They have things that keep them motivated. Us, we have LECO. Obviously, we're going to be forced to drop out. Teenage pregnancy will also rise. It will add more to our social life, will be more at risk.
As public school student, when you pass with 40%, you actually go to the next grade. But in private schools, when you pass with 40%, that is a fail. So how does the government expect us to excel in life and be going to colleges and universities if our pass rate is actually lower than their pass rate? So meaning for university classes will be filled with private students than public students, and then now it increases unemployment rate. Because of now, I have 40% pass in my pocket. I don't have a job. I don't have any diploma or bachelor pass or degree because of I cannot go to university.
Government should start focusing on children at an early age. I would like to link it with the saying that goes, isn't it better to fix young boys than to mend broken men? So the government should start fixing young children and ensuring their education than to fix them while they are broken, because you can no longer fix anything there.
Welcome back. You're still watching Expressions, your number one youth current affairs show. We're putting a very important spotlight on a very important issue around the inequalities that exist between private and public schools. And the poll question is simply this: is COVID-19 exposing more of the inequalities that exist within our public and, at least most importantly, our basic education system here in South Africa? Now, I had an opportunity to speak to Tracy, who represents Equal Education. Take a look at this insert. A very warm welcome to Expressions.
Thank you so much for having us.
Tracy, what is the difference between IEB as well as the National Senior Certificate?
So the difference between IEB is that IEB is private schools. Then the National Senior Certificate is for public schools. And also how I think the schooling year time, the schooling calendar is not the same. So the IEB will have their own schooling calendar. Then the National Senior Certificate will have its own calendar. So I don't think there's a need to really separate the two. I think if you live in a democratic country like South Africa, we need to just provide one education system. And I think that will try and address some of the inequalities that we see within the education system, especially the inequalities that are perpetuated by COVID-19.
So Tracy, our poll question is, has COVID-19 exposed more of the inequalities? I mean, what are the challenges that COVID-19 has brought to IEB as well as the National Senior Certificate in terms of the impacts that it had on learners?
The moment that we find ourselves in COVID-19 pandemic, if you are sharing a textbook, how are you going to share that textbook with another learner? If in public schools, learners are sharing desks, it means because of COVID, you can't share desk. One learner should sit on that one desk. And now there's overcrowding, meaning we need to maybe split the classes into 4, and we don't have enough classes. So I think the moment that we find ourselves in doesn't reveal anything new, but it reveals the inequalities that exist within the public schooling system. One of the things that this moment also exposed, especially between within the support that teachers and learners need, is the issue of mental well-being. So psychosocial support, if I may put it that way. So teachers would sometimes serve as social workers. We know them, they serve as everything while teaching. So now you find that learners do not have access to psychosocial support. And I think returning back to school, those are some of the things that we need to also think about. How are we providing psychosocial support to learners, to teachers, to ensure that they're able to cope during this moment.
In terms of the curriculum between public and private schools, what is the fundamental difference between the two?
Curriculum sometimes, in most instances, especially in private schools and public school, is the same. But I think the outcomes or performance is not the same, and the reason for that to be the case is because of the resources, the required resources for one to be at the advantage to understand the curriculum, but also to have good outcomes in terms of writing your exams and tests that you are required to pass.
Essentially, the learners, once they've matriculated, are all going to go to the same universities. So we wanted to know, what are the advantages that the one has over the other?
So when you go to university, you sometimes need to learn the language before you even understand the content. Then you need to learn the curriculum. So I think it takes a lot. And it's also overwhelming to be in a high institution, especially if you come from a public school. You need to work many times harder than learners who come from a private school. So I think those are some of the things that we need to acknowledge, but it's important for our government to act urgently to address these inequalities. So if we want to provide an education system to young people in this country, we need to ensure that it's of good quality and every young person can access it despite their background.
But what is the way forward? What is the solution? Just so that, our learners are on par with their counterparts.
There's a law that outlines what makes a school to be a school. So it's important for government to comply with that law. So it speaks about how many learners should be in a class. It speaks about the infrastructure that is needed in each and every public school. So I'd say it's important for our government to pull up their socks and give it their all. Fund public education system. Ensure that teachers are able to teach under good conditions. Learners are able to learn under good conditions, and everyone is able to compete. With I think equal access to equal resources.
So, we've come to the end of today's episode. A lot of food for thought, especially with that conversation that I had with Tracy Mko, where she was really talking about the challenges that we're finding in our public schools system. But I think what we definitely want to reiterate is that despite the challenges that young people are going through, learners are going through during COVID, we want them to persevere. And I think it's very important for us, as expressions, to make sure that we cover all the bases and speak to the stakeholders. But I think young people have to decide for themselves whether these inequalities are more exposed because of COVID, or these are just inequalities that have always been there, right?
Yeah, and as expressions with Jackie, we've brought in all angles to the story. And of course, for me, the highlight was speaking to the young people who said, you know what, we feel we're at an advantage, others saying we feel we're at a disadvantage. So it was a good, engagement session with them. And of course, to see which we have young people in the country that are so involved in their education, it shows which we are right on the right track. Sibonge kakhulu for your participation in Kundwen Zethu Zokuxhumana. Till next time, nsale kahle.
Adios, muchachos. Thanks for watching. Bye.